Did you see something pop up about recording? Awesome.
Yes.
So I am going to record this and save it. And I think we're going to put it on our YouTube thing so we can. So whoever wants to view it can see it again. Sorry, I'm getting a bunch of things popping up about Zoom right now. I'm just going to give us about 2 more minutes, but we will start on time.
Okay, can everybody still hear me? Great. We have a great group here today. It's very exciting. I am going to enable my chat. So because I can't see all of you because I'm screen sharing, if you have a question or a comment, please type it into the chat so I can see it because I might not see you, or just interrupt me. That's fine too. I don't mind. I have 3 kids at home, so I barely ever get a word in edgewise anyway. But I do want to make sure all questions and comments are heard today. So definitely either type in the chat or interrupt me if I don't answer your question or call on you more or less right away. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Most of you probably don't know me. My name is Erin Berical. I'm Assistant Director at the Center for Human Services Research at SUNY Albany. As you know, the Center for Human Services Research is part of central administration. We maintain the very fun MIS system, which I am not going to be talking about today, so no worries on that end. But what I have been doing is doing a lot of work behind the scenes over the last couple of years. And one of the activities that I've been working on, which was very interesting to me, both as someone that participates in Healthy Families New York Central Administration, but also in the work that I do, which is a lot of interviewing and hiring and admin type stuff at CHSR, was to develop a list of workforce competencies. These are basically, we're going to go through the competencies, so you'll get to see them a little bit. Hopefully all of you have a copy. If not, oh, thank you for telling me that I am in presenter mode. Let me see what I do here. Let me try this again. Oh, maybe it's because I'm sharing the wrong screen. Sorry, just bear with me for a moment.
And Erin, that's
Is
perfect.
that better?
And Erin, if you wanted to
Eric,
do,
I can't hear you.
can you hear me now?
Do you still see just the presenter mode?
You're good. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
Okay.
But I can see that there's a transcript going on in the bottom, so I can see that. Okay. So let's see. Great. Okay. So I have no idea where I was, but I'm just going to start again with talking a little bit about the objectives for today. We're going to review the competencies that were developed. We're going to go through them, not necessarily in detail. I know what I was going to do. I was going to type in where you could access the competencies. You don't already have them. And this is a place where you can access them and download them and use them if you don't already have them. So we're going to go through them. We're going to talk a little bit about the history and how I went about developing them. Most importantly, probably for all of you, is we'll go through some of the supporting documents. I'll let you know some of the ideas that we had as a work group on how they could be used. And then certainly if there is time at the end, I would love to hear other people's ideas on how the competencies can be used in your programs. Sound good? Okay. Oh, why did that do that? That's weird. All right, hold on. I'm so sorry. Okay. So what are workforce competencies? And basically, they are a set of expectations for what FSSs and FRSs should know and be able to do. So there's a knowledge component to competencies as well as a skill component to competencies. And these are all related to their roles in working with families. Why are competencies needed? Well, we've talked as a central administration for a long time about the need for sort of a set of competencies, basically to create a common thread of professional expectations across all HFNY programs. We've also talked a lot about hiring. I talk a lot about this, again, in the work that I do, but I think competencies really help provide a framework and a common language for both hiring as well as orienting new employees, setting up training programs for new employees, as well as, and you'll see some of the tools that we have developed to go along with the competencies, basically allowing the worker and the supervisor, as well as the program manager, to kind of monitor the individual's progress from a new hire into a more seasoned home visitor. So we don't expect that any home visitor is necessarily going to come into the role knowing exactly what they're supposed to do. They might have worked for Healthy Families before, so they're familiar with some of those practices and policies, but they don't know as much about infant mental health and those expectations or skills. So it really helps us to create that framework and see, all right, where does someone come into the job and where do we want them to be a year or 2 years down the road? So this kind of, again, gives us that common language. It gives us a framework. It helps us set up a professional development program for not just new hires, but even, individuals that have worked in the program for a while, as well as allowing the FSS and the FRS a chance for some self-assessment and self-reflection on the different knowledge and skills that they should have as a home visitor. So how did we develop these competencies? Well, I spent a lot of time, first and foremost, gathering information. So, when and Isabel was a key person that really started this process, she put in a ton of work into developing and gathering the information on what was sort of already out there on competencies. So we know other multi-site systems in other states have sets of competencies already. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel if we didn't have to. So Isabel and I, kind of picking up on her lead, spent a lot of time gathering what those sets of competencies were, how could we use them in New York as part of our multi-site system, as well as I spent some time talking to other states about how they developed their competencies, what they felt like was important for their home visitors, and really what some of the best practices were. I also talked to a bunch of leaders in home visiting programs outside of Healthy Families to kind of get an understanding of, Healthy Families obviously has its way of doing things, but there are sort of common themes across home visiting programs. And we wanted to make sure that those were incorporated and reflected in our competencies, because we might have home visitors, FRSs, and FSSs coming into our programs that are coming from other home visiting programs. So we wanted to make sure we had a foundation and we sort of understood the lay of the land before we developed our own set of competencies. We talked as a central administration a lot. We had a lot of meetings. We had a lot of discussions over, how detailed should we be? What should we include? What shouldn't we include? And I think an important part of this is the understanding that this is an iterative process. So what we have is, a set of competencies for now, but as we hear from programs about how they're using the competencies, if there's certain, pieces of knowledge that we left out that are really important to incorporate, certain skills that we maybe missed that are really important statewide, this is a flexible document and we will be editing it, not constantly, but we will have different iterations of it as, things change. And, we know the landscape of Healthy Families is always in some state of flux and metamorphosis. So we want to make sure that we keep up to date with these as well. And we also had different programs look at the drafts of competencies that we had. They provided excellent feedback for us to make sure that we included, the perspective of programs themselves. So all of that was incorporated into the documents that we have sent out. And, I wouldn't say we did, totally exhaustive, but we did spend a lot of time and energy into these to really try to create something that was useful, that was, fairly comprehensive, but not detailed to the point of being not useful. And so that's, that was really our hope when we developed these. Okay. So how are the competencies organized? We have 4 different domains that we used to organize this initial set of competencies. We have a set of competencies around HFA practices. So best practice standards, those policies and knowledge and skills that are really very much related to Healthy Families as a program. Then we have family functioning and community support. So that includes things like substance abuse, mental health of the parents, connecting families with services, and making sure that families are connected with the services they need. Infant and child health and development, which includes both prenatal as well as early infancy development, normal child development, typical child development, as well as atypical child development, those kinds of things. And then professional practice and process really has to do with ethics and boundary setting, self-care, things that are certainly important to an FRS and FSS in the work that they do. Does anyone have questions so far? And again, you can either unmute yourself or you could type into the chat if you have questions. Okay. So as I mentioned before, the competencies are organized both by knowledge and skills. And we really tried to pay attention to both knowledge and, so originally we had talked a little bit about attributes. So what some of those internal things that we might want a worker to have, the way that they approach their work, sort of some of the more internal things, but those are really hard to measure. And how you end up really measuring them is looking at things like knowledge and skills. So what does the person know, and what are they able to articulate about something, as well as what are they able to do. So we really focused in both on the knowledge aspect as well as the skill aspect. So these are some examples of both knowledge and skill competencies that I pulled right from the document. You'll see that some understands the HFA model, including the HFA best practice standards. That really is a knowledge question. We might want a worker to be able to be familiar with those. Do we need that person to be able to, say them back to you verbatim? I guess that's probably up to a program by program, but we definitely want them to be familiar with those. For a skill, we would want them to use CHEER's assessment strategies during home visits. And that would be something that we would be able to see them do when we're doing observations, or be able to, talk to them about during supervision. There are some, such as understands how substance use affects healthy family functioning. So that's a knowledge question, that's a knowledge competency, but it directly relates to a skill of being able to identify and refer families in need of support for substance use. So some of the knowledge competencies are directly related to the skills that we would want that home visitor to have. And the next one, understands the importance of taking care of one's own emotional and physical health. That would be a knowledge competency, but it directly relates to implement self-care to remain effective and present in practice. Does that make sense? So some are very much related to things we want the home visitor to know, and some are more related to things we would want to see the home visitor do. Okay. So let's take a quick look. I'm tempting fate here by trying to toggle between things, but I'm going to do my best. I want to show you companion guide. All right, well, I can show it to you from here. Okay, so these are the actual competencies. Can you see, everyone can see this on their screen? Okay, good. And these, you can see we have the 4 different domains. So we have HFA practices, family functioning and community support, infant and child health and development, as well as professional practice and process. And under each of these sort of domains, we have some overarching competencies. So for general HFA practices, we would want the individual to understand and be able to use all HFA policies and best practice standards consistently. So this first page is sort of the bird's eye view of the competencies. In general terms, what we want the individual to know and to be able to do. If we scroll down a little bit to the additional pages, this breaks it down a little bit more specifically. So this breaks it down into both the knowledge and the skills. So understands healthy families model, including the HFA best practice standards, is able to use the CHEERS assessment strategies during home visits, utilizes supervision as a planning tool to discuss and support the use of reflective strategies. So we really tried to take the more general competency and break it down into, again, what you would want the individual to know and what you would want to see them do or be able to do. And so we do that for all the different domains in the subsequent pages. I'm not going to go through each and every one because you have plenty of time to do that. It's not super long. So if you had seen the original version that I came up with, everyone was like, no way. It had like 150 different competencies on it. Everyone was like, Erin, like, what is wrong with you? Like, I'm sorry, I just didn't want to leave anything out. So we really did take some time to basically really take a good hard look and see what do we really need to include. We combined things if we needed to. Some we just sort of left out altogether because they were sort of too in the weeds. And we really wanted this to sort of stand the test of some of the small changes that tend to come down from HFA. It wasn't the type of thing where we wanted to have to revise it like every 6 months or a year. So we really tried to be mindful of those things as we put together this document. So again, knowledge and skills all throughout parent and child interaction, and those all the way through, community supports and professional practice. So this is the actual list of the competencies. Let's take a quick look though at some of the companion documents. So the companion guide is actually sort of what we're going through today. So it basically outlines the history, how the competencies came to be. It talks about some ways to use them, why are they needed, and then at the very bottom, there is a list of different resources. So in a minute, we're going to talk about some of that self-evaluation as a possible use of the competencies. And these websites and resources would be helpful as a supervisor if you were sitting down with an FSS during supervision and they had identified an area where they felt like they needed additional resources and training. This list here would be a place to start for some of that learning. It might not, be all that the individual needs, but it's at least a place to start. So that's the companion guide. Let's look at the self-assessment tool. Can you see this? No, okay. Can you see it now? Perfect. Okay, I'll zoom in a little bit because I know it can be hard to see. Okay. So this is exactly what it sounds like. It's basically a self-assessment tool. So one of the ways that the competencies can potentially be useful is as a self-assessment or a self-reflection tool by the FRS or the FSS. So it basically lists out all of the different competencies that are on the competency list. And then the individual gets a chance to basically rate themselves. How do they think do they think they're knowledgeable about this area? Do they think they have skills in this area? And the rating scale goes from 0, so I have no experience with this at all, to agree and down to disagree. So yes, a 1 would be, yes, I understand and I'm able to use all of the policies and best practice standards consistently. Maybe they disagree with that because it's not something that they feel very confident or familiar with. Then the individual can have an opportunity to write some comments in the Word document. So, why do they think they're strong in this area? Or what do they think they need support with in this area? Do they need more practice? Do they need to do more shadowing? Or do they need a training on a particular topic? Or do they feel like they don't need anything? So then again, the See Resources section could point them back to that companion document at the bottom where there were those different websites and resources for them to click on. But then I think the even more important piece is the supervisor area. So really this can be a tool that supervisors use with FRSs and FSSs to talk about you don't have to talk about every single one, but if there are certain either highlights, areas where the individual feels particularly knowledgeable or skilled, or if there's areas where the individual really is struggling and really needs some extra support, it's an opportunity for the supervisors to have a conversation with that individual to identify, where are their strengths and where are their needs. And here's some resources that we have here to help get you on the road to learning more about that or becoming more skilled. Or there might be areas where there is some discrepancy. So there might be an area where the FSS feels like they're particularly knowledgeable or skilled, but the supervisor hasn't necessarily seen that. So it's an opportunity to have a discussion over, okay, I see you said that you agree with this area, that you're knowledgeable about this. Explain more to me about that. What do you know about that? Where have you gotten, resources or training about that? And really to kind of come to, some kind of solution if there really is a discrepancy between how the individual sees their own skills or knowledge and how the supervisor sees those skills or knowledge. And then, if there needs to be a plan for how that individual gains knowledge or skills, that can be written into this very last column. So that is the way that this document was sort of intended to be used. It can be used as an ongoing tool. It can also be used as an onboarding tool. So when we talk about hiring and how we bring people into the program, it might be useful to go through this document or parts of this document with the individual when they're first hired, because most people come in, with some degree of knowledge and skills in certain areas, and they need help and development in other areas. So it could be a useful tool to use during that process. We included, Isabel was nice enough to come up with 2 sample documents that you can, again, access from our website. I'll show you where those are. And I'm going back here. And so there's one for a recently hired. What does that? So here's an example of an SSS that's been with the program for 3 months, and it sort of shows you how that individual might respond, and then the response or the comments from the supervisor. So those could be helpful if you're thinking about using this tool as a couple different examples. One for, again, a recently hired, and then there's another example document on the website that's for someone that's worked in the program for 2 years. So we have kind of a new person as well as a more experienced worker. Okay. Now, why did I set myself up with all this toggling? Not. So. That did not work. All right, I'm just going to talk through the rest of this because you really don't need to see what I'm. We're going to just talk a little bit about how to use it during hiring. So I do a lot of hiring in my job. So one of the ways that I thought these competencies could be useful are to both create job descriptions, to create interview questions. And I know not all programs have the flexibility to do this. And one of the things I like about the competencies is that they can be used in different types of ways. And just if you have a set list of interview questions that you have to ask because of where your program lies, that's okay. You don't have to use this for that reason. You can use it for other areas such as supervision, self-assessment, professional development planning, those kinds of things. But if you do have the flexibility, you can, again, use the competencies to develop your interview questions. We kind of switched around the way we do our hiring here at CHSR, and we actually developed an interview and an application rubric. So we're actually now in a very much more standardized way, rating and ranking candidates as they come in to do interviews. Do any of you use rubrics when you're hiring employees? Not so much. Well, if it's something that you're interested in doing and using competencies to help set up that rubric, I would be more than happy to help you and provide some technical assistance to do that because it's worked really, really well in our program to hire and just to get to know candidates a little bit better before we make an offer of a job. And then also doing candidate evaluations. So I really think this lends itself very well to a hiring process. Again, you might not have the flexibility to do that, but if you do, it's certainly one tool that you could use to do hiring. We used to rely a lot on our gut. Like we'd meet somebody and say, oh yeah, that person seems like they'd be a good fit. And sometimes we were right. And there is that sort of like those characteristics that you can't necessarily ask a question and get an answer about. It is kind of how is the person when they come in for the interview? How do they relate to the interview team or to me as an individual, which is harder to sort of rate. But in terms of skills and knowledge and skills, this would be very helpful to be able to do that. So we've talked about I talked about some of the other ways with new employee orientation and using that self-assessment tool to begin to see where individuals, need some help and support or where they already have knowledge and skills. Kara, you have a question.
Yes,
You can unmute yourself.
Can you give us an example? Because I think that's a great idea in terms of using it.
Hear you. Can other people hear her? Oh, it's just me.
Yes.
All right, hold on.
I think it's a great idea. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now, Erin?
Okay, can you try talking again and see if I can hear you?
Can you hear me now?
I got you. I'm sorry. Thank you for being patient. God, I hate Zoom.
No problem. You're doing a great job. No worries. So what I wanted to ask you, because I think it's a great idea of utilizing this tool in the interviewing process. I do know that Healthy Families has like some scripted questions for interviews, but thinking about this this chart that you're showing us,
yep,
it's a wonderful idea to use it in interviewing. Can you give us an example of how we would use it, like of a question that we can pull from this to utilize in an interview?
Sure. So let me see if I can bring.
And another question while we're at it, I know this is as it relates to FRS and FSS, but I'm also thinking if you have a new supervisor who is not used to, you know, the roles of the FSS and the FRS, and they're just learning, could it be a tool that we could also utilize as it relates to helping them to get them more familiar with the roles?
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. And we're actually in the process now of developing an additional set of supervisor competencies. So, you know, we'd want obviously they're very similar. So of course you'd want supervisors to have many of the same competencies that you'd want an FRS or an FSS to have. But obviously there'd be some differences as well. So we're sort of in the process of putting that together, and that will be coming out hopefully this fall or winter for programs to use. But let's see here. So a question, so here's the documentation section, right? And so we want definitely for FRSs and FSSs to have experience doing note taking and taking accurate notes based on their interactions with families and their home visits. So seeing as that's a skill that we would want our home visitors to have, an example of a question would be, you know, can you talk about experiences that you've had having to take notes during either in, you know, we don't really want them to do it in real time, but in trying to capture an interaction that you've had with the family or in a work, you know, relationship where you've had to write notes to capture that afterwards. And how did you go about that? And, you know, what were some of the challenges that you faced in writing those notes? And how did you overcome them? So that could be an example of a question that you would pull right from the competencies. You know, a lot of these, maybe not so much the HFNY or HFA specific questions, unless you had a candidate that was coming from another Healthy Families program. But like, so another one, supports and reinforces parents' positive behaviors during pregnancy. So you could talk, you know, tell me about a time in a former job that you had where you were supporting and reinforcing another person's behavior. What were some of the things that you said? What were some of the strengths-based phrases that you used to help support that individual and point out their strengths and to support them?
Can I add another one, Erin?
Of course, absolutely.
I'm thinking if you go down to parent and adult functioning in the skills or even the knowledge section, when they talk about being culturally humble, which is one of the approaches that we use in our model. Let's see here, maintain responsibility for how one's own biases and values and attributes influences one's decision. A big part of how we approach our work with families is to have a level of self-reflection. And so exploring with the interviewee, the understanding of recognizing or reflecting on their own biases and how that could impact could be one of those questions that can really open your eyes to where they are at, whether it's teachable, whether it's something that maybe isn't teachable, to really help influence how you feel about the compatibility of the program with this person. Does that help, Kara?
Yes, it does. Thank
Okay.
you so very much.
Good.
And do you know how long, because I know you said that what I heard you say that you're also working on a rubric. You're working on a rubric. I think I heard you say that. Do you know how long it will be before that's actually published or gets sent out?
So what I don't think I would develop a rubric that would be used generally, but if it's something that you're interested in developing as part of your interviewing or onboarding process for new employees, I would say definitely reach out to me, and I would be more than happy to provide you with some technical assistance around that, to talk a little bit about what are the types of interview questions that you're asking and how are you currently evaluating candidates. And if it's the kind of thing that is like more widely asked about, I certainly be happy to share any documents or plans or conversations that we had to come up with something that would be useful. But hiring is like, it's weird that I'm like so into it, but I really am, because I've done it for 16 years and it's so challenging to find, and I'm sure all of you will nod your heads. It's so challenging, especially in this day and age, to find candidates, not even quality candidates, just like candidates generally. So, I think to take the opportunity to, because you really just have one shot, like one or maybe two interactions with an individual, just that time to be able to see if they're going to be a good match for the job that you have or not. And so that's why it's really important to have, good questions and have a good system set up to rate and evaluate candidates, because that's kind of it. And then, you just kind of roll the dice and hope that it works out. So let me put my email address in the chat for anyone that is interested, again, in more technical assistance around the competencies, or, I'm more than happy to help with the hiring stuff. It is something that I've done for a long time. Other questions that people have, or ideas that people have of how the competencies might be useful, or a question if you wonder if it might be useful in a situation. Okay, that's fine. What do people think about this? And you can be brutally honest, because this isn't obviously something that we're requiring programs to use. So I try to be mindful, and we all did, of making it as useful as possible. But are people thinking that they have some ideas of ways they might be able to use these competencies, or ways they might be helpful in supporting the work you do, or you need some more time to think about it?
I would say, I think it would be useful for those of us who have to do performance evaluations. Whether it's 3 months, 1 year, but I think it would be definitely useful in helping us to crack those.
Great.
It also helps us, I think, to get a better perspective of where our staff is at any given point in time, and the areas in which they're doing well, and the areas in which they're having challenges, so we'll know where exactly we can channel our support, so they can feel supported by us as managers or supervisors.
Great. Kara, let me ask you, when you do performance evaluations, is there a form or something that you use now to do those, or is it more just like a discussion?
No, here at Andrews, there's actually a form, and it's about a page, if not a little more, but you have to actually write about your staff and areas in which we feel that we can, where we can highlight or spotlight them for doing, things really well. And of course, share if there are areas that they still need to, get some support to help them. But it is a standard document.
Great, okay.
I was just going to say that I appreciate the self-assessment. I think that that's helpful for them to be able to look at those competencies and kind of see what they're feeling about where they're at. And, maybe the supervisor is, maybe thinks the same, or maybe, so just to have their input onto where they feel they are, I think is helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And I like that it's set up. I didn't really this is a team effort, so I'm not just saying this to toot my own horn. But I like the way that it's a conversation. So sometimes with self-assessment, what you get are individuals that either rank themselves just as high as they possibly can across the board, or individuals that don't feel confident, even though they do have skills or knowledge in a certain area. So they might artificially rank themselves low. So I like the fact that it's a conversation with the supervisor, and it's an opportunity for the supervisor to say, I actually really think you do have skills in this area, and to maybe have some examples of skills that you've seen the individual use that fit into that competency. It's an opportunity to highlight the strengths of your staff, just like you obviously want your staff to highlight the strengths of the families they work with. Isabel, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think everything you said, and I just again reinforcing that the way that the self-assessment tool is set up is to really have a reflective experience with it. Because one of the things, if you're anyone, we all know that it's like going back to college when you go through the first year of adjusting to being in a Healthy Families program, and some come with some experience or comfort in certain areas. So you can feel comfortable in an area, but see some opportunity for growth. And that reflection and each column offers an opportunity to really dig deep into it. The other part about the self-assessment tool, it's just a note, the samples is one example of many ways that you can include information. It depends on the person. And I think that was really our intention, is to recognize that if we want it to be useful to you, there should be a little wiggle room for it to be adaptable to the person that you're working with, and the supervisor also. If the supervisor is a person that likes detail, there's an opportunity for that. If the home visitor is the type of person that needs to start off in a more broad, let's get the foundations down and then over time use it. So there's an opportunity to really adapt it to cater to how you feel it best works for you. That being said, I think Erin will agree that we're open to any feedback, because ultimately what we want to happen is for you to feel that it's useful to you and it's helping your job and your home visitors to grow, and to feel like they're really able to use this as a supportive tool and not just another thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if it's not something for you right now, that's fine. It's not, again, this is not a requirement. It's not meant to be a burden. Maybe 6 months or a year from now, you're thinking about, like, how can we change our hiring process? Or, we really want to provide some self-assessment opportunities for our staff. The resources will be there on the website, and you can feel free to reach out to Isabel or myself if you need support or a refresher on what were those again, or how did we use those? How did you say we should use those again? We're here to do that. So, they're done finally. And they'll be there, again, hopefully as a resource for all of you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
have a
Nancy.
question.
Sure.
So the Healthy Families New York, they also have a transfer of learning self-assessment for home visitors and supervisors. So I actually did 2 of those with 2 of the FSSs. And this one also has a rating scale. So what is the difference between, I think it looks pretty much the same, the same.
Isabel, is that something that you feel like you can speak to?
Yeah, it's the same in the fact that it gives you some sort of map or roadmap to have a focused conversation. We have over 150 standards, and then there are a lot of different places. So it's really, the TOL self-assessment is to get an idea of what activities do I want to focus on, where are my strengths, and then guide you. This self-assessment tool with the competencies offers another way of doing that, but it's more broad, where TOL is really focused on the transfer of learning from our training team is focused on practice, whereas mostly on practice, whereas these competencies incorporate all the other areas also: documentation, knowledge of information to know where do I stand. But ultimately what we're doing is the rating scale is used so that you have some sort of direction. I don't need to focus on this because I feel pretty confident in my skills, and my supervisor feel that the outcome is where we want it to be. And then this is the area where I really don't feel comfortable in it. I'm doing okay, but it's just really like a guide to help you. It's however you feel that it could be useful.
Okay, so then I can use both because I like the idea of both.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
That's very ambitious, Nancy. You go for it. I was going to say, don't feel like you need to use both, but yeah, if you want to, absolutely. I love rating scales and checkboxes. Oh.
You can even use the TOL self-assessment into the workforce development competencies. You can do it any way you want, whatever
Wow.
works best for you to feel like you're really getting somewhere.
Love it. Anything else that anyone has a question or wants to make a comment? All right, great. Well, I did put my email address in the chat, so feel free to reach out again if you need any technical assistance, you just want to talk about the competencies, you want to talk about hiring, I'm certainly available and more than happy to help out in any way that I can. And thanks so much for being here. And thanks so much for the work that you do. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your summer. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.